So, Elena, one of the things I love about your story is that we're going to get into your professional career, no doubt about that. I'm really excited to talk about government and transformation, which a lot of people think are oxymoronic. So, like, we're gonna delve right into that world of what you're bringing into local government, and super excited to give people exposure to what's happening there and what's possible. But I think there's a really powerful underpin to your story, which is, in many ways, you had to grow up really, really fast. Because at a young age, you had to leave your country and come to the United States and take on the role in many ways, maybe years ahead of time, helping your parents and so forth. So can we dive into that a little bit about what does it feel like to come into a new country at a young age and some of the things that were kind of thrust upon you, good or bad?
Sure. Yeah. So I came to the United States when I was 10 years old. So I didn't speak a word of English, and I was immediately placed into school. And school was challenging because I didn't speak the language. And so I just remember listening a lot. I tried to listen, even though I wouldn't understand the words, but I tried to pick up on body language or other cues beyond vocabulary. And so going to school was challenging, but because I was young and I was a child, between my siblings and cousins and then just neighbors, I remember learning English pretty quickly. And so even though the first few months and perhaps the first year was challenging, I do remember learning English quickly. It was challenging for my parents because they were trying to navigate services. And so again, with their limited English skills, I know that sometimes we relied on neighbors or family to take us to appointments, and I would always be there because I feel like my mom trusted me with my limited English. It's like she would take me along on those visits, and I remember like these voluminous forms and applications that they had to fill out, sometimes repeatedly. I just remember that being a challenge when we first came to the United States.
No, I love that. And was there a time in your mind, like you came at 10, and I'm going to shoot some dates out here and they may or may not make sense, but within a year or two, you kind of felt like you and your family were in a rhythm? Or were you for a longer period of time living in that like uncertainty, everything's new, I have to help my parents? Like, how did that transition for you? When did this become home, and how did you settle in to life here in the US?
That's a good question. So yeah, definitely the first few years were hard. I think once I started learning a little bit of English, it made it a little bit easier, but definitely the first few years were challenging for my parents and for myself and my siblings. We also lived in a really small apartment, so 3 kids sharing 1 bedroom. Okay. And that was difficulty. Luckily, we lived near school, so we were able to walk to school. And so transportation wasn't necessarily an issue at that time. But just in general, again, learning all the new things, right? Culturally, learning different things in America, just different things that are the way things are done in America versus Iran, where we're from.
Right.
So the one benefit, though, because you asked about the good and the bad, is that we settled in Glendale, California, and Glendale is known for its large Armenian population. Right. And so that was definitely helpful because there was a lot of stores, supermarkets, liquor stores, grocery stores where they were either Armenian owned or they had Armenian speaking employees. So that definitely made accessing some of the things we needed to access easier because we chose to settle in Glendale.
I love that. There's like Yerevan, Armenia, and there's Glendale, California. I think like those are the 2 biggest Armenian centers in the world, right? So there you go.
Yes, outside of Yerevan, Glendale has the largest Armenian population.
Does it really? Okay, yeah, I kind of was tongue in cheek with that, but that's all right. Okay, so you had community, you were in the right place. I think community matters. I think geography matters, and so you decided. I don't know if it was a master plan or something. You just kind of kept taking the best next step, but you decided courageously to go into local government.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell me about that? Because you've been there for 25 years, which is super interesting to me because there are very few people done 25 of anything these days. So can you walk us through a little bit of where that started and we're going to tee up to where you are now?
Sure, absolutely. So I told you I came here when I was 10. By the time I was 14 years old, I was in middle school, and I remember the principal would use the PA system to make announcements every morning. And one day towards the end of the school year, she made an announcement about summer jobs. And so, again, coming from a struggling family, the thought of a student being able to make money was very appealing to me. So I went to the introductory meeting, and in that meeting I learned that I could work through the city of Glendale in a summer job capacity. The work itself wasn't exciting because it was physical and manual labor out in the field. Essentially, we were helping clear brush in high fire hazard zones with the Glendale Fire Department. So
Wow.
it was manual labor, but again, at 14 years old, we don't have a lot of employment options. So it was appealing to me in that regard. So I went to the subsequent meetings, and I remember registering with the organization called Glendale Youth Alliance. They still exist today. And before I knew it, I was working in the summer. So my parents would drop me off here at City Hall, and then they would bus all of the students to the different job sites. We would perform our manual labor in scorching hot summer weather in Southern California. Yeah. And then we would come back, and there was this sense of like camaraderie and teamwork. So again, even though it was physical and manual labor and it was challenging, there was something about doing it together that felt so good. And certainly earning a paycheck was also a very good feeling.
Yeah, a sense of independence and a sense of self-respect and achievement. I get that. I totally get that. So you stuck with the city of Glendale, right? I mean, and had a long career, and then it came a time for a promotion a few years back. And let's just jump into that, because that's an interesting one. Where were you at? How did it come about? And what were some of the feelings you had when this massive leap kind of hit you?
Sure. So yeah, I entered government through that youth employment program. And over the past 25 years, I've held 10 different roles. And so I've worked in several different departments in different capacities. And in 2017, my city manager at the time approached me. At that time, I was a deputy director of our community development department. And so I was overseeing our administration and also our code compliance, which is our inspectors who go out and make sure municipal codes are adhered to. And so I was overseeing those two divisions. So he called me into his office one day, and he said, I've been thinking about this innovation team concept, innovation department. It's relatively new to local government. And so what do you think about it? And that was pretty much the extent of our conversation.
Wow. Okay.
That was pretty much it. And a funny thing, Ruben, is that I had heard of the word innovation, but to be honest, I didn't even know what it meant. Again, because I came here at 10 years old, so my vocabulary is limited, right? And so I remember telling him, all right, let me think about this. Sounds interesting. Let me think about it. So I go home that night, and I'm up till 2 a.m. I'm Googling innovation. I'm reading the definitions. And I just, in that moment, I literally fell in love with innovation, because everything that I was searching and all the results I was finding were so inspiring, and all the positive things that come when you apply innovation to any field. And so I went back to him shortly after, and I said, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm so excited at the opportunity. So yes, I'll take this on.
Was that a blessing in disguise in some way? Was ignorance bliss in some ways? Like, hey, I've got the energy, enthusiasm. I'm assuming when you go into a very traditional organization, and I'm not saying that in any negative way, but doing things for a long time, the same way, that sort of thing, there could also be some opposition. So here you're coming in, you're creating something from scratch. What was that like, right? I mean, because you're figuring it out on the fly.
Yes, absolutely. So definitely, because it was new, it was a brand new department. So he essentially asked me to create a new department. And that's not something we do every day, and certainly not something we do every year. I think probably the last department that was created here at City Hall must have been maybe 15, 20 years ago. So it's something that's not done often. Plus, at the time he asked me, our organization had gone through some cuts. So from 2012 to 2016, we reduced our organization by 20%. And the reason we did that is because financially, we knew that we couldn't keep up with the expenses that were coming due to our 5-year projections, financial projections that we were doing. So we had downsized City Hall. And so the employees that were here were obviously sad from having gone through the cuts. Plus, if they were still here, it just meant they were doing more work, because now we have fewer employees, but expectations from the community remain the same. And so we have employees who are scared and sad. They've just gone through this big change in City Hall. And then here comes Elena, who's going to start a brand new department about innovation, so it was like, what the heck is innovation? What the heck is she going to do? And, so that was kind of the atmosphere I was walking into.
I love that. It sounds like there was some organizational trauma, right? And then you're coming saying, hey, not only have we had all these changes, we're going to do more changes.
Yes. Yes.
Kind of a tough gospel to sell, I'd imagine, right? Like, because did you work with these people before? Did you have relationship capital with them? Or were these brand new people that you were leading, brand new hires, or not hires to the city, but were these brand new teammates for you as a leader?
Yeah. So because of the role of innovation director, I kind of had an opportunity to work with everyone. So although I had my small innovation team, I basically had the opportunity to work with every single employee, because we're saying, hey, we need to try innovation so we can do things better. And so I certainly had relationships with a number of employees, which actually did help, because they were able to trust me. And I said, hey, let's try it this way. So I was kind of able to take cover for them if things went wrong. So that trust that I had built from working with them in the past definitely came into play in terms of helping me.
So when you start with innovation in a city, where do you start? Right? I mean, is there a ton of projects? Was an overwhelming amount? How did you prioritize? Where do you start? What was your thinking? Were you trying to get wins early? What was your thinking around that strategically?
Yeah. So one of the first things I did was help define what innovation meant, because again, it's like this buzzword, everyone hears it. And so I wanted to help define what it meant for the city of Glendale. So through all of the research and reading that I did, the definition that I settled on that I've used in our organization is innovation is doing things differently in order to do them better.
Yeah, love that. That's very pragmatic.
And so I helped define innovation, and then all of the literature and the best practices that I was reading were talking about start small, celebrate small wins, and then it'll just grow organically from there. I also didn't have the benefit of having either the mayor or the city manager give me priorities. In some other innovation teams, the mayor dictates the innovation portfolio or topics. And so that kind of gives them something to aim for. In our case, it was, we just went through downsizing. Customer service is still a priority. The community expects the same level of service. So essentially, Elena, figure out how we can work smarter, not harder, because we have less employees. So that was kind of the mandate, that I was given.
You're in an interesting position, because you're managing down and you're managing up.
Correct.
Right?
Absolutely.
So you're managing expectations down and up. It's a really interesting. How did you build alliances, and how did you build coalitions, winning coalitions, both up and down, and even laterally in the organization or horizontally in the organization?
So internally, I did use my past relationships with them. So I did also use my listening skills. So because I was an executive, I was part of the executive team. So I would be listening. Every week we would have meetings. And so if a department director was going through a challenge where I felt like we can help contribute, I would call them after the meeting and say, hey, I think you were struggling with this. I think we can help in that way. So definitely my listening skills came back to help me, and partnering internally in that way. And a big component of being successful in an innovation role is you can't tout yourself as the expert. They are the experts in their field. You're just going in and helping them. So that's something that also helped out, because I didn't go in and say, hey, here's innovation. I got all the I got the tools and I can show you how to do this right. It was, no, I'm here to listen. You tell me your challenges, and I'm going to go to my toolkit and see what I can find to help you out. So it was always approached as, we're partners in this together, but you are the expert in your field.
I love it. It sounds like you were kind of the conductor to the symphony, right? Your job was to make the symphony play really, really well and play well together and come out with a beautiful sound, for lack of a better description.
I love that analogy, because actually it's funny, because sometimes people will ask me, well, what does the innovation work actually look like on a daily basis? And sometimes it's as simple as what you just described, Ruben. It's essentially bringing people who are not on the same page together. So I have one department that's dealing with something here who has no clue that another department is tackling essentially the same problem, because we have these vertical silos in local government, right? You've got your department director who's dealing with their department, and then you have another one, but there isn't a lot of opportunity to do this horizontal work, right? So that's kind of where the innovation team comes in and starts connecting the dots. Hey, if you guys got together, you're essentially tackling the same problem, and you could put your heads together and your resources together, and you can do this better. So sometimes it's as simple as just aligning people and bringing them on the same page. And
encouraging them and cheerleading them. It sounds like celebrating wins. And this is awesome. It sounds like taking a servant leadership model also was an antidote maybe to ego and pride. It was like, hey, we're just all figuring this out together. So there's no room for that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the emotional range, because you're taking on a new role within a new role, right? I mean, it's a double whammy, right? Taking on a new role. I imagine some pros and cons to that. Pros are you can create something from scratch. There isn't a legacy system. The cons are you have to build everything from scratch. It's time consuming, trial and error. What was it like to be Elena in those days? Were there some real extreme highs and lows when you clocked out at, in the evening?
Yeah, in the early days, I remember, again, because I fell in love with innovation. So I remember being up really late into the evening, even beyond, the research phase, when I said, yes, I can put this department together and this is how I will do it. There was so much to learn from, and there were so many cities that were already doing innovation work. So reading about their examples of how they were applying innovation, and then I just couldn't wait to share that with our team. So I would routinely be emailing articles and best practices to our team. And so even though it was challenging to take on a brand new role in this city, an innovation role nonetheless, plus, in the US, there's only 80 cities that have an innovation department or innovation team. So that's less than 1% of cities. So the field itself is relatively new. So that was the other part of it. But I will say that my excitement at the role and the excitement at the topic of innovation for sure overshadowed any fears that I had.
I love that. Yeah, and it sounds like you still are a thought leader in the space. You know what I mean? You got a lot of. Yeah, I love that. I think that is so important, that that level of like this faith and excitement and enthusiasm can really compensate for a lot, right? It can really help you go the extra mile many, many times. How did you manage folks and their fear doubts? Like, hey, we've always done it this way. How did you, any tips or tricks for people looking to say, hey, how do I enroll people in a vision? How do I enroll people in doing something new?
Sure. So I'm also a bit of a geek for neuroscience and psychology. So in my spare time, I do read a lot about that. And that also came in handy because I was able to make employees feel comfortable. At the core of every human being is like the need to be seen and heard. And so oftentimes it was, if we went into a meeting and I felt hesitation, it wasn't even necessarily hesitation at the innovation project itself. There might have been some ill feelings about, relationships with other supervisors in that department. So I helped address some of those issues. And so that definitely came in handy. And when there was obstacles to the actual innovation work, what I would say, or one strategy that I remember using, is calling things a pilot. I called it a pilot. And then it's like, hey, it's just a pilot. It doesn't mean it's forever. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, and just calling it that made people be more open to change.
I love that. You just kind of reclassify it, right? And there's also, again, humility in that. Hey, we're going to try some things, whatever works. And it sounds like you won trust as well, because you would listen to people, and because they were the experts, they found like their fingerprints were on solutions. Like they really felt like their input was being utilized and valued, it sounds like to me, which probably rebounded back to you in trust and credibility.
Absolutely.
Am I reading it right?
Yes, you are. And I said I approached everything from a partnership standpoint. So every month I would do an update to our city manager, which was shared with our city council. And I specifically made sure that any articles that I wrote, I framed it as, this is a partnership. This is us with this department. So I gave credit to that department for trying and being an early adopter of innovation. So I gave the kudos out to them in that regard too. And again, that also helped win some friends. And once the first few departments started working with us, then everyone kind of looked around and said, hey, it's not so bad to be working with this innovation department.
There's some personal benefits and there's a lot of fun, and we're changing the world. I love that. Last question for you. Oftentimes, the private sector touts itself on being, in the advanced guard of innovation. But what are some things you think the private sector could learn from folks doing innovation in the government sector?
So I think what government does well is that just by nature of being government, we have to serve everyone, right? So the whole aspect of equity, which is something new that a lot of private organizations are starting to, work into their programs. That's something we do well because we can't turn away any customers, right? We have to basically serve everyone. So even if I'm promoting a new digital service, I have to think of that senior who might not have a computer, a laptop, or a smartphone that still needs to access this service, right? So we have to basically serve everyone. So I think that's something that the government sector naturally does better than the private sector, because in the private sector, you kind of zoom in, this is my audience, this is who I'm selling to, and then you kind of exclude everyone else essentially. So I think the whole aspect of equity and serving everyone is something that we do well in government. So there's one more thing, Ruben, that went into my decision making and made this a courageous decision, and that's that when this opportunity was presented to me, it came with becoming a department director, so an executive role. Prior to that, all of my positions were civil service protected. And so what this meant was if I took this opportunity to create this new innovation department at Glendale, it came with an executive position, which clearly has a lot of benefits to it, but it also came at the risk of being an at-will employee. So I could essentially be let go at any time.
That's interesting. You kind of left the force field, right? You kind of stepped outside. That's an interesting one. And so, was that type of performance pressure in your mind healthy? Because it's a very different way to operate. Did it affect you in any way? Did you think about it a lot? How did that affect you? Because it's super courageous, right? It's like being tenured at a university and you said, you know what, I'm going to give up my tenure, right? I'm a free agent.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Again, I have to go back to my excitement. So again, I knew that I loved this field from what I was learning, and I knew that I didn't have a guidebook. This was sort of uncharted territory, but I knew that all the successes that I had had up to that point were sort of the stepping stone. So I knew that no matter what challenge was thrown my way, that I would figure it out. And if I personally couldn't figure it out, I had resources out there. I had relationships with internal stakeholders and also external stakeholders that I could call upon to take this challenge on. And so it just goes to show that, especially for women, right? It's okay to learn on the job. I know we've talked about this with my female network, that a lot of times women will shortchange themselves because if they're looking at a new job opportunity, they want to make sure that they can tick off every single essential function that's listed there. And I think studies have shown that men will apply for the job when they think they're about 60 to 70%. They can meet 60 to 70% of them, but women, it's like 90 to 100%. So we shortchange ourselves because we feel like we can't do it. But in reality, you can. I'm proof of that, right? I didn't know anything about, I didn't even know what the word innovation meant. And I took this opportunity and I learned as I went, and it's okay to do that.